Welcome back to the next ethics lecture. This one is Truth and Knowledge. And so today we're going to talk about what it is for something to be, what it means for something to be true, and what we are saying when we claim that something is true. So the question I want you to consider is anything true? Think about that for a moment. What does it mean when we are saying that something is true? There are different views about what we are saying, about the concept of truth and what it means when someone claims that something is true. And we're going to look at a few of those today and try to make some determinations about what truth is. The first one we're going to look at is called subjectivism. And subjectivism is a type of relativism. That means that truth would be subjective, or it would be relative to something. In this case, it would be relative to the subject. That's the key thing here. So if you see subjectivism, so truth is relative to the subject. So if someone believes something is true, then it is true. Truth depends on the individual. Truth is basically a preference at this point. Whatever someone wants it to be, that's what it is. It's a preference or it's an opinion. Whatever you think or whatever you prefer to be true, then that is true. So, if you have heard statements like, well, that may be true for you, but this is true for me, that would be a form of subjectivism. Okay, subject. Truth is determined by the subject. So, when we talk about what we mean when we're saying, when I say that something is true, do I mean that if somebody wants to believe something is true, or if it's my opinion, then that is true? And if that is what you think you're trying to communicate, then subjectivism may be a type of view of truth that you could affirm. But I think that we probably would agree that when I say it's true that I paid my light bill, or if somebody assaulted me and I say that I'm affirming it's true that a report that they assaulted me, or whatever it is, that I'm not just saying this is my opinion or this is what I prefer. I'm trying to say something different. So perhaps subjectivism is not going to be a form of truth that we can affirm. Okay? So the next version, or the next conception of truth, would be known as conventionalism. Okay? And so when you're looking at these things, convention is going to be the key word here. It's still a type of relativism. Truth would be determined not by an individual with conventionalism. It would be determined by the culture, or kind of the social convention, what the group agrees or affirms as true. So if a group believes something, then it's true, and truth depends on the group, not on the individual, but on the collection of individuals. Maybe it's a society, maybe it's a tribe, maybe it's some kind of other grouping of people. And so what the group accepts as being true would be what we would say is true under the concept of conventionalism. And in this case, instead of truth being an opinion, truth is a social construct. It is something that is made up by society. It is constructed by society. That's what we mean when we say a social construct, that it comes from society's determination. So, if conventionalism is true, then, or if it is the case that we accept conventionalism, then when we say that something happened and I'm reporting that something is true, or I'm trying to communicate something is true, then what I am saying is that it's accepted by the group. That's the arbiter of what makes something true, is that the group accepts it or the group believes it. Okay? So, if we're talking about something like the shape of the earth, whether it is round or flat, whether it's some kind of a sphere or whether it's flat, then the truth value of that claim would be dependent upon whether the society believed it. So in this case, like we had with subjectivism, we didn't really talk about that. I could believe that the earth is flat, and you could believe that the earth is a sphere, and we would have to say that they are both true. With conventionalism, now maybe my society says that the earth is flat, and your society says that the earth is true, but they would be different since truth is determined by the group. Each group would claim truth, and we would not have any way to really kind of determine that, because truth would be determined by the group. That's conventionalism. So are we saying, when we say something like the earth is round or the earth is flat, some kind of claim like that, are we saying that this is simply what most people believe or what our society accepts? Or are we trying to say something different than that? Probably we're trying to say something a little more firm than that. Okay, so that's conventionalism, and that's one concept of the three that we're looking at here about what truth is. The next one is objectivism. Okay, and so the root here is object, so objectivism. And so truth is discovered in this concept. So it's not created, it's not determined, it's discovered. So truth is like an object. Like you might discover a tree. If you go out and you observe a tree, you find a tree, you didn't create the tree, you found it. So truth would be like that. It would be something that you uncover or you discover. If something is true, it doesn't matter if anyone believes it is true, because truth is independent of belief. And that's the concept here of objectivism. Truth does not depend on anyone's opinion of it or anybody's apprehension of it even. It is something that exists in reality. Okay? And why? Because truth is connected to reality or states of affairs. States of affairs are simply descriptions of the way the world is. Okay? So states of affairs is not a complicated concept. It's just a description of the way the world is. And so when we have an objective view of truth, then truth is an external reality. It's something that is not dependent upon any individual, whether as an individual or collection of individuals as a group, to determine what it is. It's in its external reality. Okay? So when we say something is true, are we trying to say that this is the way things are in the world? Is that what we mean when we say something is true? So if I were to say the world is flat or the world is a sphere, that what I'm trying to say is that in reality, the states of affairs have obtained such that the world is flat or the world is a sphere. Is that what I'm claiming? Rather than it's my preference, or rather than it's just what our society believes. Probably we're going to see that most of the time when we talk about truth, or perhaps all of the time, this is closer to what we conceive of that we are saying, that truth is objective, not that it is relative to something else. Okay, so subjectivism, the individual determines the truth. Conventionalism, the convention, social convention, or the group determines what truth is. Objectivism, truth is independent of anybody else, and it's just a fixture of the world. It's objective. Okay, so those are the three concepts there. So what do you think? Is truth relative or objective? I want you to consider that for a moment. You can pause the video if you want to think about it. You should have read some of your text to deal with this. But I want you to think about the following statements. The statement, there are no absolute truths. Or, if we were to rephrase that, all truth is relative. It's the same proposition. Remember, we talked about the law of identity. So there are no absolute truths, or all truth is relative would be the same thing, just worded differently. And if you were to say that there are no absolute truths, all truth is relative, you're saying that nothing is true in an absolute sense, meaning that it is always true for everyone, everywhere. Okay? There are some who claim this, that claim that all truths are relative, that there is no such thing as absolute truth. Okay? So, if you were to claim that, then you would be saying that there's nothing, whether the world is flat or whether it is round, that has not been true for everybody, everywhere, and through all time. It has perhaps changed. Okay? Or, what about the claim all truths are socially conditioned? So everything that is claimed to be true is a result of its social conditioning. So what people believe to be true is a result of their social conditioning, how they were raised. And if you were raised in one place, you might believe that X is true, and if you were raised in another place, you might believe that X is not true. And every claim, every truth claim is like that. Even claims about whether the earth is round or flat. Things like that. So think about those for a moment. Do you think that those truth statements or those claims are accurate? Do they work? What about the claim here, there are no absolute truths? All truth is relative. So we looked at that just on the last slide. Is this statement, we just want to look at it and examine it, is this statement absolutely true? It's a question we have to ask. The claim says all truth is relative. Well, that is a truth claim itself. So does that mean that truth claim is only relatively true? Or does it mean, as it appears to be, that it's an absolute statement? So all truth is relative is absolutely stating there is no truth that is not relative. However, this is itself an absolute statement. So if it is true, if it's true that all truth is relative, then should we believe it? And the answer is clearly no, because if you believe the statement, you shouldn't believe it. The claim that all truth is relative means that this, which is a truth claim, and an absolute truth claim must not be an absolute, it must be relative because all truth is relative. So it's self-defeating. This is what we call referentially incoherent, that if you believe it, you should not believe it, because it just contradicts itself. It says there is no truth that is absolute, yet it is itself an absolute statement claiming absolute truth on a very narrow thing. So we find the claim here that truth, there are no absolute truths or all truth is relative, is self-defeating. So we really can't logically accept that. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold up. What about all truth claims are socially conditioned? What about that statement? Well, this statement is a truth claim, okay, because it's saying that this is a truth about the world, that all truth claims are socially conditioned. Is this statement only a product of social conditioning itself? Well, if all truth claims are socially conditioned, then this could only be a statement that is a product of social conditioning. Now, if it is true, then are we required to believe that? Or do we just believe it because it is social conditioning? So has our social conditioning conditioned us to believe the statement all truth claims are socially conditioned? And if this statement is simply a cultural convention, then we are free to ignore it like any other cultural convention, right? I mean, the cultural convention in the United States is to drive on the right side of the road. But as you're driving down the road, nothing prevents you from driving on the left side, except that you may want to try to avoid accidents. You may not want to get a ticket. But on an empty road or to pass people, we've done that too. I mean, there are times when perhaps there's an obstruction in the right side of the road and you have to go to the left side of the road to get around it. Okay, there's nothing logically that keeps you from being able to drive on the left side of the road. But the social convention is to drive on the right side. So, if truth claims are only social conditions, then we could simply ignore them. And is that what we're saying? Can we just ignore other truth claims? Can we ignore the truth claim that if you leap off of a tall building that you will fall and injure yourself or die when you hit the ground? Can we just choose to ignore that and not have it apply to us? Probably not. So, perhaps the claim here that all truth claims are socially conditioned is weak itself. So, is truth relative or objective? Well, if we deny absolute truth, we find that is self-defeating. So our attempts to try to say that there is no such thing as absolute truth or all truth is socially constructed, they come into the problem that they defeat themselves. Their claim defeats themselves. So there must be then objective truth. So we're going to proceed throughout this course that there is such a thing as objective truth. Now, it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to say, how do we know if something is true? So we're going to talk about theories of truth now. So we're kind of going pretty quickly through this. But on one hand, it's fairly easy for us to say, yes, okay, truth can't be relative. It has to be objective. There has to be real objective truth. But how can we get from saying that it exists to saying that we know what it is? And that's where some of the challenges lie. So there are three approaches to truth we're going to look at, or three theories of truth that we're going to look at in the next few slides. First is the correspondence theory of truth, the second is the coherence theory of truth, and the third is the pragmatic theory of truth. So when we look at these theories of truth, what we are going to be trying to do is, how do we define what it means to say that one proposition is true and another proposition is false? That's kind of what we're going to be trying to determine here. And remember, we have to know what true or false is, because when we evaluate arguments, the first thing we look at is the structure of the argument. The second thing we have to determine is whether the proposition is true or false. So in order for us to be able to determine whether a proposition are true or false is, we need to know what we are saying when we say something is true or false. So that's why we are looking at these theories of truth. So the correspondence theory of truth, and look at our terms when we look at these things. Correspond is the key word here in the correspondence theory. And in the correspondence theory, something is true if it corresponds to reality. In other words, if it is the way that it actually is in the real world. Now, a more formal way of saying this is a proposition is true if and only if, and this little statement right here, these little IFF, and if with two F's, stands for if and only if. So when you see that, it's not a typo, it is intentional. A proposition is true if and only if it corresponds to the way things actually are. So this theory makes a claim about the external world, the world outside of ourselves. So the statement, it is currently raining, is true if and only if it is currently raining. Now, when we talk about it's currently raining, we're talking, we want to say, we will limit that to it is currently raining somewhere, maybe within 100 yards of our position at the time that we are saying it. So as we're watching this at videos at different times at different places, the statement, it is currently raining, may be true or false for us. However, in your location, it will be either true or false, and that won't change. Okay, at that there, that'll be the same for you at your location, anybody else who would be with you at your location. So, it is currently raining under a correspondence theory of truth would be true if there was precipitation falling from the sky at the time that you're considering this. And so reality will confirm or disconfirm a proposition. And so when we say, well, yeah, of course, that's how we determine whether something is true or not, we would see whether what the truth claim is actually obtained, the philosophical term, whether those states of affairs obtained, or whether it is actually the case. And so that's how we would determine something is true. That seems to make sense. And the correspondence theory has a lot of following. It is an important theory of truth. However, it has not always been the most favored theory of truth. And the biggest objection to the correspondence theory is what's known as the problem of access. The correspondence theory of truth, we are making a claim about reality. So correspondence theorists have to show that they have access to reality in such a way that we can determine whether or not a proposition corresponds with the real world. And the skeptic will claim that we might not have ability to do that. We may not be able to interpret reality in such a way that we actually understand it. In other words, we may not be able to get to the real world. Now, you're going to perhaps think this sounds really odd, but let's consider this for a moment. Every thought you've had, every idea that you've ever had has taken place in your mind, right? And your mind is somehow related to your brain. It may or may not be identical to your brain. And your brain gets all of its sensory input through your nervous system. So your nerves and various forms of nerves, they encounter the world and transmit neurochemical signatures or electrochemical signatures to your brain and gives that stimulus to your brain, and your brain translates that, interprets that as what's going on in the real world. And that's how we've always encountered the world. You touch the desk, You look at your video monitor, or you look at the wall, and you get stimulus from that, and you make determinations. However, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a fever? If you've had a fever, then your body was probably telling you that you are cold, and in reality, your temperature was higher than normal. And you felt cold, not hot. So we know, if we've had a fever, that sometimes our bodies, the input that we get, the things our brain tells us about the way the world is not correct. That it is actually a report that's not reliable. Another example that you could think about this, and you've probably heard this example before, if you had 3 jars of water or 3 bowls of water, one of them was warm, one of them was kind of hot, the other has got some ice cubes in it so it's cold, and the one in the middle is room temperature. And if you put one hand in the hot water, one hand in the cold water, and you leave them there for a minute, and then you take them both out at the same time and you put them both in the lukewarm or the room temperature water, then the hand that was in the hot water thinks that the new water is cold, and the hand that was in the cold water thinks the new water is warm. And we know that the water is the same temperature. So we know that we're getting different reports from the same stimulus from our body. So because of that, we have questions about whether or not we could actually get to the real world, whether we actually are able to make truth claims about the real world that are going to be reliable or that we ought to believe. So the problem of actually getting out of making a claim about something outside of ourselves is one of the problems with the correspondence theory. So one of the ways it can be criticized, because we know our senses, which are the things that we rely on to make claims about the real world, are not perfect. They sometimes have problems. So because of this objection, some people prefer a theory of truth that does not require us to show that we can access and or interpret reality properly. And so the correspondence theory may sound good, but some people would reject it because of this problem of access, and they would move to something that is a little bit less, that makes claims that are not quite as bold. And that is the coherence theory of truth. That's going to be another version, a coherence theory of truth. And in a coherence theory of truth, something is true if it coheres, again, coherence, if it coheres, if it fits within what an individual believes. A proposition is true if and only if it coheres with a set of beliefs that a person holds. This theory does not make any claims about the world outside of us. It only is making references to sets of beliefs that we affirm as true, that we hold as true. So, it is currently raining would be true if it does not conflict with our other beliefs. So, if I look out the window and I believe I see the sun is shining, or I believe I do not hear the raindrops falling, or if I'm standing outside and I do not believe that I'm feeling like I'm getting wet, then I would determine that it's currently raining would be false, because of the other beliefs I had. And so this is something of a nuanced difference, but the difference is real. So it is raining would be true or false, depending on whether or not it lines up with the other beliefs that I hold. And so our other beliefs are what confirm or disconfirm our propositions. So I want you to imagine for a moment a spider's web. And in a spider's web, you've got all these different little segments of the web that all attach to one another. Okay? For the coherence theory of truth, our beliefs would be kind of like a spider's web. And each little segment, if you were to take not the full strands, but each little segment and kind of join them together and say that they all fit together in this web. And so if I believe something is true or not, I would accept that something is true if it fits within my web. So if one of those segments was kind of off-kiltered and maybe crossed over a couple and didn't fit right, then that would be a belief that would cause what we call cognitive dissonance, or it wouldn't fit within the things I believe, and so then I would reject it as true. But if I have a belief that fits nicely in and doesn't cause any problems in my web of belief, then that would be a belief that I could hold as as true if it fits there, but if it doesn't fit, then I would see that that belief is false. Okay? The coherence theory is not without its own criticisms, and there are some objections to the coherence theory of truth. One is that you can have contrary propositions that can be accepted as true. Now, how could you do that? How could you have two or three things, or have multiple things that you believe that would contradict themselves? Well, I'm going to give you an example of one fairly quickly. I want you to imagine that that you drove to campus today. Imagine that we were meeting in the classroom, because I normally do this example in the classroom. You drove to campus, you left your home, and drove to campus. And on your way to the campus, let's assume that you live in the Lake City area, you heard on the radio that there had been a fire in a part of town called such and such, called something. And you thought, oh, that's interesting, it's too bad that that happened. And so you got to school, you got to your class, and then you also happen to think, so you believe that there was a fire in this part of town, a certain part of town that had a kind of an unusual name, and you also hold the belief that your home, where you live, is likely in the same condition that it was when you left it. So you left your home this morning, and you believe that my home is in a very similar condition to the way I left it. And you also believe that there was a fire in this place, this part of town, that they called something or another, and something that you didn't really recognize. Well, as you're sitting in class, you come to find out that the part of town that they mentioned, where several homes were destroyed, is exactly a different name for the part of town that you live in, but you didn't realize that was what they called that part of town. So now you're sitting in class, and you believe both propositions, that my home is in about the same condition as when I left it, and this part of town where I live has had a fire that has destroyed several homes. Okay, and so those may be incompatible beliefs. Now, how can you hold those? Well, we have to, at the same time. Well, we have to consider that this web of beliefs, or the spider web that we're thinking about for our beliefs, it's going to be very, very big. So imagine you're in a dark room, and this spider web that we've been talking about fills this entire room. And maybe even think of it as like a warehouse. And the things that you can think about at any given moment would be what you could shine a flashlight on. So you've got a small flashlight in your hand, and you can shine the flashlight on the spider's web, and you can see only parts of the spider's web at a time. You can't see all of the spider's web at one time. You don't have that much light. Our brains are not able to consider every belief that we hold all at one time. So beliefs that we're shining the flashlight on would be beliefs that we're thinking about, or what we would call occurrent beliefs, things that we are currently considering. So that'd be kind of like shining this flashlight on the spider's web. The other beliefs that we hold would be called dispositional beliefs. That means we believe them. We don't not believe them just because we're not thinking about them, but they're not such that we can consider all of them at the same time. We have limitations on what we can process and what our mind can do. So because of that, we can have different things that we accept as true or false, and they could contradict, but they might be, where they contradict might be part of the spider web that's in the dark that we can't see. And the only time that we actually realize it is when we shine the spotlight on there, when we shine the light on that area. And we may not do that very often. So that's how you can hold contrary propositions. You can accept them as true, not realizing it. And then once you realize it, then you're kind of faced with a struggle. You're going to have to change one of your beliefs, okay? Because you find out that you've got a conflict, or either you're going to have to believe two things that you know are in conflict, and that will cause cognitive dissonance. And also, because our beliefs are like spider's webs, imagine if you had a spider's web and you grab one of the webs and you tug on it a little bit. Well, that changes the shape of the entire web, or at least portions of the web, depending on how big it is. So when our beliefs change, then the shape of the web of beliefs would change. And so that would be such that the things that we accept as true are constantly shifting and changing based on other things we believe is true. And so that gives us an opportunity to see how things could get crossed out of our sight, and how we could have contradictory propositions that we would accept as true and us not really think about it, because it happens, our webs shift and the things we believe change, and we don't necessarily go and review every belief that we hold every time we change a belief. We just couldn't do that. So that's one of the objections. And so if we could believe things that are contrary, then that would be a problem. That would be a reason why we shouldn't accept the coherence theory. One other is the coherence theory is relativistic. Now this is kind of a claim, and what that really means is that each individual has their own web of beliefs, and this really can sometimes confuse epistemology with ontology. Ontology is the study of reality, and epistemology is the study of truth. So this to say it's relativistic would say that the world would be different based on what other people believe. I don't think that's what most coherence theorists would hold. They would hold that reality, the world, actually makes us have these beliefs, but most coherence theorists are not trying to say truth is relative. They're trying to say that we may not be able to justify the claim that we can say something about the external world. We're simply trying to justify truth based on reference to our internal states rather than things outside of us, so that we may not be able to get to. So, and here the objection here is the coherence theory does not reference the external world, or reference access to the external world. While some people would say that as a problem, the coherence theorists will definitely see that as an advantage there, because then they don't have the whole problem of trying to prove they can say something about the external world. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along, but that'll be in a different section. All right, the pragmatic theory of truth. This is the third one, and this is really not all that important for us in philosophy, but you do need to realize that it's out there. The pragmatic theory of truth would say something is true if it works, if it gets results. So a proposition is true if and only if it is useful in achieving desirable results. This theory does make a claim about the external world, and so it's currently reigning. It would be true if an advantage is gained by accepting it. So what kind of advantage could you get from accepting that it's raining? Well, if you don't want to get wet, then you would stay inside, or you'd use an umbrella or a poncho or something, that you'd have that advantage. If you do want to get wet, then you could go outside or stay in the rain. There could be some kind of way of talking about this where you get an advantage. And reality would confirm or disconfirm propositions. However, pragmatism doesn't really help us very much in ethics here, because there could be a number of things that work. In fact, when we look at pragmatism, something can work that's false. Now, I want to draw your attention to the Ptolemaic model of the solar system. Some of you may know what this is. It's a model of the solar system that is geocentric or Earth-centric. So the Earth is the center of the solar system. Everything orbits around the Earth. And that's not the way probably that most of us believe the solar system is actually set up. We probably, and I'm assuming most of us here, or all of us, believe that the solar system has the sun at the center and the planets rotate around the sun, not around the Earth. But Ptolemy, when he came up with that system, viewed the solar system as having the Earth at the center, which allowed them to figure out where the planets were going to be and things like that. And it worked. And it was very complicated, but it worked. And so for the pragmatist, if we were to say, if you're a pragmatist, does the solar system, model of the solar system that's heliocentric, the Copernican model, or the Ptolemaic model, which one is true? The pragmatist would have to say, well, they both work, so they're both true. But we are convinced that the Ptolemaic model is actually false, but it works. It can tell you where the planets will be in the night sky from the Earth, so it works. And so that's one of the problems there, is you can have things that are false that work, and you can have other propositions then that have little or no benefit. So the pragmatic system has a difficult time determining if something is true or false, if false things do actually get results. And then you have many propositions that would just be, the pragmatic theory couldn't do anything with. Suppose there is a teacup in orbit around Saturn. It may or may not be the case that there is a teacup in orbit around Saturn, but what benefit could there be? What advantage, or how could we prove anything for the pragmatic system? You'd have some issues there. So which approach is best for, or which approach is the best approach? The correspondence theory, the coherence theory, or the pragmatic theory? And that's something that you're going to have to consider. Now, I will tell you that in recent years, the correspondence theory has become more popular, but for a long time, the coherence theory was the main the most popular epistemological approach. Okay, probably till the middle of last century, or even into the 60s and 70s, the coherence theory was the main approach to epistemology. And the correspondence theory, because of certain advances and different philosophers in epistemology, has become more prominent as they've had pretty good ways of trying to overcome some of the objection of access. So, but that's, which approach is best for you, you'll have to determine. I just want you to understand some different approaches that are out there. All right, just continuing on in epistemology, how do we know what we know? Okay, how do we know what we believe? We're going to talk about skepticism briefly. Skepticism challenges the idea that we have knowledge. How can we know, for example, that our memories are reliable? Have you ever remembered anything wrong? Have you ever thought you remembered something and it turned out that it was not correct? Probably. Probably we've all had memories that have failed us, or things that we could not remember that we should have been able to. So there can be gaps in our memory. There can be times we remember something incorrectly, or things like that. So our memories are not completely reliable. And how can we know that our senses are reliable? We've already talked about that. Sometimes our senses are not very reliable. Because of these things that we experience, the skeptic will claim that if we cannot have certainty in the things that we believe, then we have doubt. And if we have doubt, then probably we can't know very much, or there's some things that we think we know that we don't know. If the skeptic is correct, then we don't know some of the things that we think we know where there is sufficient doubt. And we may not be able to know anything. Some skeptics would doubt that we could have any knowledge at all. So what should we do about this? How should we respond? Is knowledge possible? I want you to pause the video, think about that for a few moments, and then continue. Well, hopefully you've thought about that, and maybe you've come up with some approaches, some ideas that you think might work, and certainly you could put those in the discussion group. But there have been two basic approaches to respond to the skeptic over the years. The first is rationalism, and the next is empiricism. So we're going to look at both of these approaches to this claim that we cannot have knowledge. Rationalism is an approach that says we can know things and we can have knowledge, and that knowledge comes through reason, comes through logic. Knowledge comes from logical deduction of propositions from axioms. Axioms are a form of a priori knowledge, so that an axiom is something that you cannot prove, but you know that it is true. So, in the way that the laws of thought that we talked about in the previous lecture, those were axiomatic, meaning we can't prove the law of non-contradiction, we can't prove the law of identity, we can't prove the law of the excluded middle, but once you understand what they say, you see that they are true. So this is an a priori knowledge. Axioms are a priori. And because of that, there are certain things that we just understand, we see that the truth value of it. And you have an approach to building knowledge based on that foundation. And René Descartes is the philosopher who really is credited for this. You have the term here, cogito ergo sum, which basically says, I think, therefore I am. You've probably heard that. Perhaps you've heard that. Well, what Descartes did is he developed a methodological doubt. He said, because of the skeptic's challenge here to our knowledge, he said, well, what can I know? Can I know something? So he said, well, what can I doubt? Could I doubt that I ate breakfast? Well, yeah, sure, my memory is not great. Could I doubt that that what I'm seeing is actually there? Yeah, sometimes my senses give me the wrong information, so I could doubt that. And so he builds this system up. He tries to doubt everything he could doubt. Could I doubt that I actually have these, that I'm actually as old as I am, that I've been in existence for more than just a few moments, or all these things. All these things that you could doubt. And so he starts trying to doubt everything, and he's able to doubt a lot of things. And then he kind of asks himself, could I doubt that I am doubting? And then he says, no, I really can't doubt that. And so, because in order for me to doubt, I would have to exist. So if I exist, or if I'm doubting, then I must exist. And so this is kind of where we get this idea of I think, therefore I am. Because in order for me to doubt something, I would have to exist. So I can't doubt my own existence. And then from that, he builds up a system to say, well, if I'm firm that I exist, then I could have other things that I build up. And he builds up a system to ground knowledge. And he goes on to believing that God exists, and then into the real world and things like that. All of it based off of the idea that he exists, so therefore he can't doubt that. And so because of that, remember, we're dealing with deductive arguments here, deduction. And the rationalist will sometimes claim certainty of knowledge. Doesn't mean everything they know is certain, but they would claim there are certain things, or there are some things, rather, that you could know with certainty. That there are some propositions, some foundational basis of things that we know with certainty. And that would be the rationalist's position. So rationalism would then build all of this up, and there's things we can know with certainty, and then other things we could know with perhaps degrees of reliability, but not with certainty. But there's some knowledge that we can have with certainty, the rationalist then would claim against the skeptic. Well, the other approach, the empiricist approach, goes from a different way. Instead of beginning with logic, it begins with experience. So in an empiricist approach, if you're familiar with the scientific method, that is a inductive approach, and it is an empiricist type of approach. And so you have the whole school of thought that's apart from the rationalists, the empiricists, who argue that knowledge comes from experience. So you have someone like John Locke, who would argue that when we are born, we are a blank slate, or a tabula rasa, a blank slate, on which experience writes her lessons. And so when we have sense experiences, we start off with nothing. And when we have sense experiences, we start to have these experiences written on us by our existence. Our senses, when we're born as a baby, we start to hear things, smell, touch, taste, see, all of those different things. And they start to write their experiences on our blank slate. And our slate is not blank after all, after a little bit. And then we acquire ideas through sensation. So when we have these experiences, they kind of form these ideas that are written on us, and then we combine those ideas through reflection. So the external process, or the process that comes from our senses, is sensation, and that gives us ideas and things that happen through our senses. But then we, with our mental states, our internal states, will combine these ideas. We'll mesh them together. And through reflection, we will come up with different ideas about the world. And so empiricism's approach is not, it's one of experience and observation rather than of logic. So empiricists may claim probability of knowledge. So we get these ideas from the real world. We are confident that these representations, our senses have told us, reliable information, but we do know that sometimes they're false, but they're more reliable than not. So when empiricists talk about knowledge, you'll tend to get more of probability that it's likely that something is true, because empiricism is more of an inductive approach rather than a deductive approach that the rationalists took. So you have two different approaches to trying to determine a response to the skeptic. So, the skeptic claims here that we need to be certain in the things that we know. Do we need to be certain? Well, probably not. Now, for the rationalists, they say, well, we are certain about some things, and then other things we don't have to be certain about. For the empiricists, they're going to say, well, we're not certain about anything, but we don't need certainty for knowledge. So, both approaches are going to answer the skeptic, and you can determine which one you think answers it better. To say, yes, we have certainty in some things that are foundational, and other things we don't have certainty in, but it's okay. We still have knowledge. Or the empiricist says, no, we don't have certainty in anything, but it's okay because we can still have knowledge, because we can be more reliable than not. So that's the kind of the debate, and you can talk about that or discuss it and figure out where you would lie. But classically, do we need certainty for knowledge? Classically, knowledge has not been defined with certainty. It's been defined as justified true belief, or JTB for short. So a definition or a conception of knowledge this way, that someone would have knowledge if, 1, they hold a particular belief, 2, the belief that they hold is true, and 3, they have a good reason for the belief. It is justified. So justified true belief. 3 components to knowledge. That you have the belief, that the belief itself is true, and that you have a good reason for having that belief. So, if we go with a justified true belief knowledge, which has been around since the Greeks, then someone would not have knowledge if they don't hold a belief. Okay? You would not have knowledge about something that you don't have a belief about. Okay? That makes sense. That's not too confusing. Someone would not have knowledge if they believed something that was true, but they did not have justification for the belief. So perhaps I believed that there was a teacup floating around, orbiting Jupiter, and perhaps there is a teacup actually orbiting Jupiter, but I couldn't know that there's a teacup orbiting Jupiter without having some good reason for me to know that. Okay, just because I want to believe it is not justification. Okay, and then finally, someone would not have knowledge if they held a false belief, even if they had justification for the belief. And this can be a little bit confusing for us. So let's say that you have a significant other, maybe it's a spouse or a girlfriend, and you girlfriend, boyfriend, you think that your significant other is cheating on you. And you have good reason to think they're cheating on you. You had someone told you that they saw them, they were with this other person, they looked like they were flirting and all that kind of stuff, or they saw them go somewhere or do something. And so you have a belief that your significant other is cheating. You have good reason. Some people told you some good information. Maybe they even showed you pictures of the people together. But if they are actually not having an affair, you do not have knowledge. If they are not actually engaged in that relationship. So you might have good reason for believing it. You might believe it, but you would not know that they are cheating on you if they are in fact not cheating on you. If the proposition that your spouse is cheating on you is false, then even if you were justified to believe that it was true and you did believe it, it would be a false belief, so therefore it's not knowledge. Okay? That doesn't mean you wouldn't be upset about it. But the point is that to have knowledge, you must have a justified true belief. And if it doesn't meet one of those criteria, then whatever you have, it is less than knowledge. Now, this conception of knowledge was the pretty much the standard until 1963, when a gentleman by the name of Edmund Gettier published a 3-page article entitled "Is Justified True Belief Knowledge?" And the problems that he brought up have plagued discussions of knowledge ever since. We're going to just briefly look at this, what the problem he brought up was, and we'll talk about it just briefly, and then we'll be done, because we're going pretty long on this lecture video anyway. So here's one of the original situations that Gettier proposed from his essay. Suppose that Smith and Jones have applied for a certain job, and suppose that Smith has strong evidence for the following conjunctive proposition. Okay, conjunctive means there's going to be two parts to it, and they're joined, or at least two parts. Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith's evidence for D, which this is D, proposition D, might be that the president of the company assured him that Jones would in the end be selected, and that he, Smith, had counted the coins in Jones' pocket 10 minutes ago. Proposition D entails another proposition, E, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. So, Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, is this proposition. And Smith's evidence for this proposition is that he's been told by the president Jones is going to get the job, and he knows the coins in Jones's pocket because he counted them just 10 minutes ago. From those, you get this entailed proposition, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, so Smith has good reason to believe E. Okay, let's suppose that Smith sees the entailment from D to E, and he accepts E on the grounds of D, for which he has strong evidence. So that's basically what we're saying. There's good reason for him to believe E because he has evidence for D. Okay, in this case, Smith clearly is justified believing that E is true. But imagine further, unknown to Smith, he himself, not Jones, will get the job. And also unknown to Smith, he himself has 10 coins in his pocket. So what they're saying is, it's not Jones will actually not get the job. Smith is the one that will get the job. And Smith doesn't realize it, but when you count the number of coins in his pocket, he happens to have 10 coins in his pocket. So that's the situation that actually happens. Proposition E then is true, and E is the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. But the justification that Smith had for E is not that he has 10 coins in his pocket and that he is going to get the job. It's that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket and Jones is going to get the job. So Smith, the proposition D, where Smith inferred E, his justification for E, is false. In our example then, and this is Gettier still, all of the following are true. E is true, Smith believes that E is true, and Smith is justified in believing E is true. But it's equally clear that Smith does not know that E is true, for E is true in virtue of the number of coins in Smith's pocket, while Smith does not know how many coins are in Smith's pocket, and bases his belief in E on the account of the coins in Jones's pocket, whom he falsely believes to be the man who will get the job. And so what Gettier has done here is given a situation where a man believes a proposition E, that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And it's going to be him, Smith is the man who gets the job, and Smith has 10 coins in his pocket. But that's not what Smith believes. Smith believes Jones will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. So he believes something that is justified, it's true, and it is a belief, yet we would still say this is not knowledge, because the way his belief was justified was based off of the proposition D, which was false. And so this kind of problem just really threw the whole epistemological world into an uproar. It turned over the apple cart and the reverberations are still happening. But particularly for the next 40 years, it really has caused issues in epistemology, problems. So there have been lots of people that have abandoned their whole approach to philosophy over this and have tried to deal with this. And there have been many, many other examples that have come about where what these are called Gettier-type counterexamples have been dealt with. And people have tried to deal with this problem. So we're not going to deal with this. This is not an epistemology class. However, I want you to know that the concept of justified true belief as sufficient for knowledge has been in place from antiquity until the 60s, and then the question has been, does it work? Because it seems that Gettier is saying, well, it may not always work. And so the question is, what else does it need? What else does the conception of truth need other than a justified true belief? What is the other component? And that's kind of where the discussion is today, and people are trying to search for that. Some people say, well, it's just Gettiers are outliers. They're really not that important. Others have abandoned their entire project, their entire life's work to start to deal with this. So that's kind of where we are. This concludes the lecture. Please respond in the lecture video discussion, and I'll see you next time.